Dear medical students, second stage, to be continued with the third video clip about neurophysiology. Now, nerve fibers and their physiologic classification can be classified into types A and C. Type A are subdivided into alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. Type A are large and medium-sized myelinated fibers of spinal nerves. Type C are small unmyelinated nerve fibers that conduct impulses at low velocities. C fibers constitute more than one half of sensory fibers in most peripheral nerves and post-ganglionic autonomic fibers, while large myelinated fibers transmit impulses at velocities about 120 meter per second. The smaller fibers transmit impulses at about 0.5 meters per second only. Now this illustrates that here the left is the effect of a weak stimulus with only this on the left, the result of weak stimulus with only a single nerve fiber in the middle of the bundle stimulated, while when there is more nerve fibers stimulated, half red, and it is more red, that is to say more fibers stimulated, there is the strongest stimulus will result in more response. Now the somatic sensations. Somatic, it is a term inverse what is called visceral. Somatic is the against of the visceral. The classification classified into mechanoreceptors include tactile and position stimulated by mechanical stimuli. Thermoreceptors number 2, thermal stimuli. Number 3, pain sense activated by any painful stimulus causing damage to the tissue. The transmission of tactile signals in the peripheral nerve fibers. The specialized sensory receptors transmit their signals in type A beta nerve fibers. The transmission velocity is about 30 to 70 meters per second. Very important to concentrate on what is called specialized sensory receptors. Need accurate and high velocity for conduction, while free nerve ending tactile receptors transmit signals by type A delta, also myelinated fibers, but the velocity is lower, about 5 to 30 meters per second. Some tactile free nerve ending transmits by type C unmyelinated fibers at the velocity of a fraction of a meter, up to the maximum of 2 meters per second. This is for function of tickle. Sensory pathways for transmitting somatic signals into the CNS. That is to say, into the spinal cord and then to the brain. Two sensory pathways, dorsal column, medial lemniscal system, and the other anterolateral system. The dorsal column medial lemniscal system carries signals upward to the medulla, mainly in the dorsal columns of the cord. After the signal synapse and cross to opposite side in the medulla, they continue upward through brainstem to the thalamus by the way of medial lemniscus. So the medial lemniscus is the tract that it transmits the dorsal column sensory modalities and sensations into the central nervous system, into the brain. Signals in the anterolateral system, the other system, immediately after entering the spinal cord from dorsal spinal nerve roots, will synapse in the dorsal horns of the spinal gray matter, then cross to the opposite side of the cord and ascend through anterior and lateral white columns of the cord and terminate at all levels of lower brain stems, then to the thalamus. Dorsal column medial lemniscal system composed of large myelinated nerve fibers transmit signals to brain at velocities of 30 to 110 meter per second, regarded as high conduction velocity, while anterior lateral system composed of smaller myelinated fibers transmit signals at velocities from few meters to 40 meters per second. Conduction velocity is lower than the dorsal column medial lemniscal system. This is important difference, and another difference between the two systems is that the dorsal column medial lemniscal system has a high degree of spatial orientation with respect to their origin. Spatial mean from space، يعني ترتيب مكاني، ترتيب المكان خلال المرور في الspinal cord. While the anterolateral system less spatial orientation. The dorsal column medial lemniscal system has many modalities to be transmitted from 1 to 6. Touch, which requires a high degree of localization. Touch, which requires a transmission of fine gradations of intensity. Phasic sensations like vibration, sensations that signal movement against the skin. Position from the joints, يعني joints, whether it is flexion, extension, angle of flexion, and number 6, pressure sensations with fine gradations of this pressure. While the anterolateral system modalities from 1 to 5 as you see. Pain, thermal, crude, tactile itching, sexual sensations. Now this is a cross section showing anatomy of the cord gray matter and ascending tracts in the white column of the spinal cord. This is the midline of the spinal cord. This is a cross section of the cord. In the middle, it is the gray matter of the cord. In the periphery, the white matter and the tracts of the cord. The gray matter means there is neurons and synapses. Now the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway pass uninterrupted to the dorsal medulla. Mean uninterrupted, that is to say, there is no synapse until the dorsal medulla. Synapse in the dorsal column nuclei, cuneate and gracile, two nuclei. Cuneate for upper limb, gracile for lower limb. Fibers. Second order neurons decassate to opposite side of brain stem. Second order neuron means the neurons postsynaptic neuron and called second order because they are the second neuron in the pathway. Decassate to opposite side of brainstem, upward to the thalamus. Through brainstem, each medial lemniscus is joined by additional fibers from sensory nuclei of trigeminal nerve, which is responsible for sensations of the face and the head. In the thalamus, fibers terminate in sensory relay area called ventrobasal complex. The third order neuron project to post central gyrus of the cerebral cortex called somatic sensory area, which is two types, 1 and 2. The spatial orientation of nerve fibers in the dorsal column medial lemniscal system. In the spinal cord, fibers from the lower part of the body lie toward the center of the cord, while those enter at progressively higher means from the pelvis, abdomen, chest, and upper limb. They are located successively laterally. The left side of the body is represented in the right side of the thalamus and vice versa. Now we are reaching to the somatosensory cortex. The informations reach the somatosensory cortex, the cerebral cortex. The orientation divided into 50 distinct areas called Brodmann's areas according to histological structural differences. The sensory signals from all modalities of sensation terminate in cerebral cortex immediately posterior to the central fissure, and anterior half of the parietal lobe is concerned with reception and interpretation of somatosensory signals. The posterior half of the parietal lobe provides higher levels of interpretation. Now, in general, the cerebral cortex visual signals terminate in the occipital lobe. The auditory signals terminate in the temporal lobe. The cerebral cortex anterior to central fissure and constitute the posterior half of the frontal lobe is the motor cortex, and it is devoted to control the muscle contractions and body movements. A major share of this motor control is in response to somatosensory signals received from the sensory portions of the cortex. projection of dorsal column medial lemniscal system through thalamus to the somatosensory cortex. Here is the pathway: medial lemniscus, spinothalamic tract, mesencephalon, which is the midbrain, ventrobasal complex of the thalamus, and then to the postcentral or sensory somatosensory cortex, and these are the Brodmann's areas, 50 areas, and each area has a number. This is a lateral view of the brain. Lateral view of the brain. Of course, this is the frontal lobe, temporal, occipital, and parietal. Here is the somatosensory cortical areas 1 and 2, and body regions represented in it as shown. Here is the representation of different areas of the body in the somatosensory areas 1 and 2. And some areas are larger than others according to the representation and sensory receptors in the region. The somatosensory areas 1 and 2. The reason for this division is a distinct and separate spatial orientation of different parts of the body in each of these areas. Now, number 1 is more extensive and more important in general. And also there is some differences here. The spatial orientation of signals from different parts of the body in somatosensory area 1, it lies immediately behind the central fissure in post-central gyrus, Brodmann's areas 3, 1, and 2. Each lateral side of cortex receives sensory information exclusively from opposite side of the body. This is very important to be kept in your mind. Some areas of the body are represented by large areas in the somatosensory cortex. For example, the lips, the greatest of all, and followed by the face and thumb. And this is according to the number of specialized sensory receptors in these regions: the lips, the face, and the thumb. The head is represented in most lateral portion of somatosensory area 1, while the lower part of the body represented medially. Layers of the somatosensory cortex. There are 6 layers of neurons. Layer 1 is next to the surface, يعني قريبة من سطح الدماغ. Number 6 بالعكس يعني deep. Number 1, each layer has a specific function for it. Sometimes 2 layers has the same function, as you see. And these are the names and the orders of the layers from 1 to 6: molecular, external, granular, small pyramidal, intergranular, large pyramidal, fusiform, or polymorphic. And thank you.